The GPS lost signal about 40 miles back, somewhere between the last gas station and what felt like the edge of the world. I'd been driving for 6 hours through British Columbia wilderness, following forestry service roads that got narrower and more rutted with each turn. My truck bounced over another pothole and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The job posting had been vague: fire lookout, seasonal position, remote location. What it hadn't mentioned was just how remote. I hadn't seen another car in 2 hours, and the last road sign I'd passed was so faded I couldn't read it. Pine trees pressed in on both sides of the gravel road, their branches scraping against my windows when the path curved. I needed this job. Sarah's medical bills had cleaned out our savings, and the life insurance barely covered the funeral. The forestry service was paying decent money for someone willing to spend a week alone in the middle of nowhere, watching for fires. How hard could it be? The tower appeared around a bend, like something out of a postcard, a tall wooden structure rising above the tree line, with a small cabin perched on top. Solar panels glinted on the roof, and a radio antenna stretched even higher into the gray October sky. The access road ended at a small clearing where I could park. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the silence. No traffic, no neighbors, no city noise. Just wind through the pines and the distant call of some bird I couldn't identify. It was exactly what I thought I wanted, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts without anyone asking how I was doing or if I needed anything. The wooden stairs zigzagged up the tower's frame and I counted them as I climbed. 47 steps with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder and a box of groceries in my arms. By the time I reached the top, my legs were burning and I was breathing hard. The altitude up here was no joke. The cabin door was unlocked, just like Robert Jarvis had said it would be. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The space was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 12 by 12 feet with everything you'd need crammed into it. A narrow bed against one wall, a small kitchen area with a propane stove and mini fridge, a desk positioned in front of the main window that faced out over miles of forest. Radio equipment sat on a shelf above the desk, and binoculars hung from a hook nearby. I set my groceries on the counter and dropped my bag on the bed. The place was clean, but had that musty smell of a cabin that had been closed up for a while. I cranked open a couple windows to get some air moving. That's when I noticed the notebook. It sat on the desk, a plain spiral-bound thing with a blue cover. Someone had written "Rules" across the front in black marker, the letters pressed deep enough to leave indentations in the cardboard. I picked it up and flipped it open. The handwriting was neat but urgent, like someone had been trying to get important information down quickly. The first page was titled "Night Rules" and numbered 1 through 7. 1. Stay inside after sunset. Do not go onto the observation deck or down the stairs for any reason. 2. If you hear voices calling your name, do not respond. Do not look out the windows. 3. Check the horizon every 15 minutes for a mustard-colored star. If you see one, sound the alarm immediately. It will disappear when you do. 4. If someone knocks on the door, hide in the closet and remain silent until dawn. Do not look to see who it is. 5. Do not use the radio after sunset. If it turns on by itself, unplug it immediately. 6. If you hear humming, get under the bed and stay there until it stops. 7. Do not open the door for anyone, even if they claim to be forestry service personnel. I flipped the page. More rules, these labeled day rules. 1. Complete fire watch duties as normal during daylight hours. 2. If you see anyone approaching the tower, do not wave or acknowledge them. 3. Report all incidents to forestry service during regular business hours only. 4. Do not read these rules aloud. 5. If you find items moved or missing, make a note, but do not investigate. At the bottom of the page, someone had written in different ink, "These rules kept me alive for 3 months. Follow them exactly. Monsieur Chen." I read through the whole thing twice, then set the notebook back on the desk. What the hell was this? Some kind of joke the previous lookout had left behind. The guy must have been out here too long, started seeing things that weren't there. Isolation could mess with your head. I'd heard stories about people in remote jobs losing it after a few weeks alone. Still, something about the handwriting bothered me. It wasn't the scrawl of someone having a breakdown. The letters were careful, deliberate, like someone documenting important safety procedures. I shook my head and started unpacking my groceries. Canned soup, instant coffee, bread that would probably go stale before I finished it. The propane stove lit on the first try, and I heated up some chili for dinner. Outside the windows, the forest stretched endlessly in all directions. I could see why someone might start imagining things out there. The sun was getting low by the time I finished eating. I'd organized my clothes in the small dresser and set up my laptop on the desk next to the radio equipment. The Forestry Service had given me a satellite internet connection that was supposed to work well enough for basic communication and weather reports. I tried calling Sarah's number without thinking about it. Muscle memory making my fingers dial before my brain caught up. The call went straight to a disconnected message. I'd been doing that for weeks now, reaching for my phone to tell her about something funny I'd seen or ask what she wanted for dinner. The grief counselor said it was normal, that it would fade with time. So far, time wasn't doing its job. The sky outside was turning purple, and I could see the first stars appearing through the windows. I glanced at the notebook again, still sitting where I'd left it on the desk. Stay inside after sunset, the first rule said. I'd been planning to check out the observation deck, maybe get a feel for the area I'd be watching. The view from up there would be incredible, and the fresh air might help clear my head. But something about those rules nagged at me, not because I believed them. They were obviously the paranoid ramblings of someone who'd spent too much time alone, but because they were so specific, so detailed. I walked to the door and put my hand on the knob. The metal was cold under my palm. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the tower sway just slightly. I could feel it in the floorboards. The smart thing would be to go out there, prove to myself that there was nothing to worry about, show that I wasn't going to let some previous tenant's delusions affect my judgment. I was here to do a job, not hide inside like a scared kid. But my hand wouldn't turn the knob. Maybe it was the grief making me cautious. Maybe it was the isolation already getting to me after just a few hours. Or maybe it was the way those rules had been written, not like someone trying to scare the next person, but like someone trying to save them. I let go of the door handle and stepped back. One night wouldn't hurt. I could explore the observation deck tomorrow in daylight when I could see what I was dealing with. Tonight I'd stay inside and get some rest. It had been a long drive, and I had work to do in the morning. I closed the curtains and settled into the chair at the desk, the notebook still within reach. Outside, the wind continued to blow through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard something that might have been an owl, or might have been something else entirely. The first night passed without incident, just me and the wind in the pines. I'd managed to heat up some soup, check the radio equipment, and even get a decent night's sleep despite the tower's occasional creaking. Maybe Chen had just cracked under the isolation after all. I woke up around 7 to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of pine needles. The forest stretched out in every direction, endless green broken only by the occasional rocky outcrop or distant ridge. It was beautiful in a way that made your chest tight. The kind of view Sarah would have loved. The morning routine was straightforward enough. I checked the weather instruments mounted outside the windows, recorded wind speed and direction, scanned the horizon with binoculars for any signs of smoke. Nothing but trees and sky. The radio crackled to life at 8 sharp. Base station checking in. Tower 7, this is dispatch. Morning report. Tower 7 here. Clear skies, wind from the northwest at about 10 knots. No smoke visible. Copy that. Have a good day up there. Simple, professional, normal. I spent the day getting familiar with the equipment, reading through the official manual they'd given me. The real one, not Chen's paranoid notebook. Standard fire watch procedures, radio protocols, emergency contacts. Everything made sense. Everything was rational. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself that the rules were just the ramblings of someone who'd spent too much time alone. The tower felt solid beneath my feet. The radio worked fine, and I hadn't seen anything stranger than a hawk circling overhead. But as the sun started to set, painting the sky that same deep purple I remembered from the night before, I found myself glancing at the notebook. Still sitting on the desk where I'd left it, Chen's careful handwriting visible on the open page. I closed the curtains again, just being cautious. Around midnight, I was sitting at the desk trying to get some work done on my laptop when the radio crackled to life. Static filled the cabin. Not the clean static of an empty channel, but something deeper, layered, like voices talking underwater. I looked over at the equipment. The power light was on, volume knob turned to its usual setting. I hadn't turned it on. The static shifted, cleared, and then I heard something that made my blood freeze. "Daniel?" A woman's voice, soft, familiar. "Daniel, are you there?" My hand was halfway to the radio before I stopped. The voice was coming through clearly now. No static, like someone was sitting right next to the microphone. "I've been looking for you, Daniel. I've been waiting." It was Sarah's voice. Not similar, not close. It was her voice. The slight rasp she got when she was tired. The way she drew out the second syllable of my name when she wanted my attention. The voice I'd heard every day for 8 years until the cancer took it away. "I know you can hear me. I know you're listening." My throat felt like sandpaper. This wasn't possible. Sarah was dead. I'd held her hand when she died. I'd buried her. Remember our first apartment? The one with the broken heater? You said you'd keep me warm all winter, and you did. You remember that, don't you, Daniel? I did remember. We'd never told anyone about that. About how we'd spent 3 months sleeping in every sweater we owned. How I'd wake up early just to start the coffee so the kitchen would be warm when she got up. "Come outside, Daniel. I'm waiting for you. I'm right here." The voice was so clear, so real. I could almost see her standing at the bottom of the tower, looking up at my window with that smile she used to give me when I was being stubborn about something. "I miss you. I miss us. Don't you want to see me again?" My hand was on the radio now, fingers wrapped around the microphone. All I had to do was press the button, talk to her, ask her how this was possible. "Daniel, please. I've been alone for so long. Come down and see me, just for a minute." The microphone felt warm in my hand, real. Sarah's voice kept calling my name, telling me things only she would know. About the scar on my shoulder from when I fell off my bike at 12. About the way I hummed off key in the shower. About the night she told me she was sick and how I'd held her until dawn. I yanked the power cord from the wall. The radio went silent instantly. The cabin felt impossibly quiet after the sound of her voice. Just the wind outside and my own ragged breathing. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dead radio. My hands were shaking. Sarah was gone. Sarah had been gone for 6 months. Whatever that was, it wasn't her. But it had sounded exactly like her. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning came gray and overcast, with low clouds hanging between the trees. I went through my routine like a robot. Weather check, radio report, horizon scan. Everything normal, everything rational. Around 10, I called the Forestry Service office. "This is Tower 7. I'm having some equipment issues up here." "What kind of issues?" The dispatcher sounded bored. "The radio turned itself on last night, around midnight. I had it powered down, but it came on anyway." That's weird. Let me check the maintenance logs." A pause. The sound of papers shuffling. "Shows here that all the equipment was replaced last month. Brand new digital system. Shouldn't be any problems." Well, something happened. Is there a way for signals to come through even when the unit's powered down? Not with that model, no. You sure you didn't just forget to turn it off? I looked at the radio, still unplugged from the wall. I'm sure. Okay, well, I'll make a note of it. If it happens again, let us know. Might need to send a tech up there. Right, thanks. I hung up and stared at the radio for a while. Brand new equipment. No way for signals to get through when it was powered down. But I knew what I'd heard. The day dragged on. I tried to focus on my duties, but my eyes kept drifting to the radio. Around 4, I plugged it back in, just for the evening check-in. Nothing happened, just normal dispatch traffic, weather updates, routine chatter between towers. As the sun started to set, I found myself reading Chen's notebook again. The night rules. Stay inside after sunset. Don't respond to voices calling your name. Watch for mustard-colored stars. I'd been watching the horizon every 15 minutes since sunset, just like the rules said, scanning with the binoculars, looking for anything unusual. So far, just the normal stars coming out as the sky darkened. Third check of the night. I raised the binoculars and swept across the horizon, left to right. Trees, ridgeline, more trees. The usual constellations starting to show. Big Dipper, North Star, Cassiopeia, and then I saw it. Low on the horizon, just above the tree line. A star that definitely hadn't been there 15 minutes ago. But it wasn't white or blue or red like normal stars. It was mustard yellow. I lowered the binoculars, blinked hard, looked again. Still there. A sickly yellow light that seemed to pulse slightly, like a heartbeat. My hands found the radio without thinking. Dispatch. This is Tower 7. I need to report something. Go ahead, Tower 7. I looked at the star again. Still there, still that wrong color. I'm seeing an unusual light on the horizon, bearing approximately northwest. Appears to be yellow in color. Copy that. Aircraft. Negative. Stationary. About 15 degrees above the horizon. We'll make a note. Keep an eye on it. Will do. I set the radio down and picked up the binoculars again. The yellow star was gone. I scanned the entire horizon twice. Nothing but normal stars and darkness. According to Chen's rules, I'd done exactly what I was supposed to do. Spotted the mustard-colored star. Reported it immediately. And now it was gone. Maybe the rules weren't so crazy after all. The third night started like the others. I'd gotten into a routine by then. Dinner at 6, radio check at 7, curtains drawn by 8. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting everything that familiar orange-gold color that made the forest look almost peaceful, almost normal. I was sitting at the desk, updating my weather log, when the first knock came. 3 soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up from my notebook, pen still in my hand. The sound had come from the door. I was sure of it. But that didn't make sense. Nobody could climb 47 steps without me hearing them. Those wooden stairs creaked if you so much as breathed on them wrong. I waited. Maybe it was just the tower settling, or a branch hitting the wall. The wind had been picking up all evening. Tap, 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 same rhythm, same location, definitely the door. I walked over to the window next to the entrance and peered out through the glass. The stairs were empty. The clearing below was empty. Nothing but shadows and pine trees swaying in the breeze. The knocking came again, louder this time. Not taps. Actual knocks. Someone's knuckles against wood. My heart started hammering. I pressed my face closer to the window, trying to see if someone was standing just outside my line of sight. Maybe crouched down or pressed against the wall. But there was nothing. Just the wooden platform and the railing, and beyond that, a 40-foot drop to the forest floor. The knocking continued, steady, patient, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. I grabbed Chen's notebook from the desk, flipping through the pages until I found the night rules. Rule number 4. If someone knocks, hide in the closet. Do not answer. Do not look outside. Wait until dawn. The closet was barely big enough for a person, more like a tall cabinet, really, with a few shelves and some hanging space for clothes. I'd stuffed my extra gear in there on the first day. Now I yanked it all out, tossing sleeping bags and spare boots onto the floor. The knocking got heavier. Thud. 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 Like someone was pounding with their fist instead of just knocking. The whole door shook with each impact. I squeezed into the closet and pulled the door shut behind me. The space was cramped and dark, smelling like mothballs and old wood. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. Through the thin closet door, the pounding continued. Thud, thud, thud. Then it stopped. I held my breath, straining to listen. Maybe whoever it was had given up. Maybe they'd gone away. The knocking started again, but this time it was coming from the side wall. The same rhythm, the same force, but now it was hitting the cabin wall about 6 feet to the left of where I was hiding. That was impossible. To get from the door to that wall, someone would have to walk around the outside of the cabin, but there was no walkway there, no platform, just a straight drop to the ground. The knocking moved again. Now it was coming from the back wall near the kitchen area, then the other side wall, then one of the windows. Whatever was out there was circling the cabin, hitting different spots like it was testing for weak points, or like it was looking for another way in. I pressed myself deeper into the closet, my back against the rear wall. The shelves dug into my shoulders, but I didn't dare move. Chen's rules had been right about everything so far. I wasn't about to start ignoring them now. The knocking continued for what felt like hours. Sometimes soft taps, sometimes heavy pounds that made the whole tower sway. It would stop for a few minutes, long enough for me to think it was over, then start up again somewhere else. My legs were cramping from being folded up in the small space. My neck ached from hunching over. But I stayed put, counting my breaths, trying to stay calm. Then finally, silence. I waited, counted to 60, then to 100. Still nothing. But just as I was starting to think about coming out, I heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy boots on wooden stairs, descending slowly, step by step, getting fainter as they moved away from the cabin. That made my blood run cold, because nobody had climbed up those stairs. I'd been listening the whole time, and I would have heard someone coming up. The stairs were loud. You couldn't climb them quietly if you tried. But someone was definitely going down them now. I could hear each step clearly, the familiar creak and groan of the old wood. 47 steps, just like I climbed every day, except in reverse. The footsteps reached the bottom and stopped. Then I heard nothing at all. I stayed in the closet until dawn. My whole body was stiff and sore by the time the first gray light started filtering through the cabin windows. Only then did I push open the closet door and crawl out, my legs barely working. The cabin looked normal. Everything was where I'd left it. The door was still locked from the inside, the chain still in place. I checked every window, all locked, all secure. No signs of forced entry anywhere. But something was wrong. I noticed it when I went to make coffee. My mug, the blue ceramic one I'd been using every morning, wasn't where I'd left it. I always put it on the counter next to the stove after washing it. Now it was sitting on the shelf above the sink, next to the radio equipment. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to remember if I'd moved it. Maybe I'd put it there without thinking. People do things on autopilot sometimes, but I knew I hadn't. I was careful about routines, especially here. Everything had its place. I walked over to the desk to write down what had happened during the night. Chen's notebook was sitting there, but it was open to a page I'd never seen before. A blank page about halfway through the book. The pen was lying across it like someone had been writing and then stopped mid-sentence. I flipped back through the pages. All of Chen's rules were still there, exactly as I'd found them. But this blank page, I was sure the notebook had been closed when I'd grabbed it the night before. I always closed it after reading. It was a habit. I spent the next hour going through the entire cabin, looking for other things that might have been moved. The windows were all still locked. The door was still secured with both the regular lock and the chain. There was no way anyone could have gotten inside. But someone had been here. I was sure of it. I checked the stairs, looking for footprints or any sign that someone had actually climbed up during the night. The wood was dry and the morning dew hadn't settled yet, so any recent prints should have been visible. Nothing. The stairs were clean. I walked around the base of the tower, examining the ground. If someone had been circling the cabin like I'd heard, there should have been tracks, disturbed leaves, broken branches, something. Again, nothing. The forest floor looked undisturbed. But I knew what I'd heard. The knocking, the footsteps, the sounds of someone moving around the outside of the cabin. It had all been real. I climbed back up to the cabin and sat at the desk, staring at the open notebook. The blank page seemed to be waiting for something, like it was expecting me to write on it. Instead, I closed the notebook and put it back where it belonged. Then I moved my coffee mug back to its proper place on the counter. But even as I went through my normal morning routine, weather check, radio report, horizon scan, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore, that something had found the tower during the night and was still watching, still waiting. The rules had kept me safe so far, but I was starting to understand that whatever was out here, it was getting bolder, testing boundaries, learning, and I still had 4 more nights to go. The 4th night started like the others. I heated up another can of soup, checked the radio at 7, and drew the curtains as the sun disappeared behind the trees. By now, I had the routine down cold. Dinner, weather log, binoculars every 15 minutes, and Chen's notebook within arm's reach. I was updating my notes about the previous night's events when I heard them. Voices. Multiple people talking just below my floor, their words drifting up through the wooden planks like smoke. Told you he was up there. Daniel, right? That's what the paperwork said. Should we go up and introduce ourselves? My pen stopped moving. The voices were clear as day, maybe 6 or 7 people having a casual conversation directly underneath me. But that was impossible. The tower sat 40 feet off the ground on wooden supports, and there wasn't any platform or structure down there. Just empty air and a long drop to the forest floor. He seems nice enough. Quiet type. I think we should visit, it's only polite. Daniel's probably lonely up there all by himself. They knew my name. They were talking about me like they'd been watching, planning. The casual tone made it worse somehow, like this was just a normal social call they were discussing. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices came through anyway. They weren't muffled like sound traveling through wood should be. They were crystal clear, like the speakers were right there in the room with me. Let's go up and say hello. He'd like that, I'm sure he would. Daniel, we're coming up to visit. Footsteps started on the stairs, multiple sets, climbing in unison. The wooden steps creaked under their weight, each footfall distinct and heavy. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. The same creaks I heard every time I climbed up or down, but now there were several people making the journey together. I kept my hands clamped over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. The notebook was right there on the desk, but I didn't need to check it. I remembered the rules. Stay inside. Don't respond to voices. Don't open the door. The footsteps kept coming. 15 steps. 20. 30. They should have reached the top by now, but they just kept climbing, the same steady rhythm echoing up from below. Almost there, Daniel. We can't wait to meet you. It's going to be such fun. The voices were getting closer, rising with the footsteps. But when I risked a glance at the door, nothing was there. No shadows moving past the windows. No shapes on the platform outside. 47 steps. That's how many there were. I'd counted them every day. But the footsteps kept going. 50, 60, 70. An impossible staircase that went on forever, carrying voices that had no bodies. I sat there with my hands over my ears until the gray light of dawn started seeping through the curtains. That's when the voices stopped. Not gradually, not fading away. They just cut off mid-sentence like someone had flipped a switch. Daniel, were almost... Silence. The footsteps stopped too. No sound of people turning around and going back down. No doors closing or voices saying goodbye. Just the normal morning sounds of wind in the trees and birds starting to wake up. I lowered my hands slowly. My ears were ringing from the pressure, and my shoulders ached from hunching over the desk all night. The cabin looked exactly the same as always. Coffee mug on the counter where I'd left it. Notebook closed on the desk. Everything normal, but I knew what I'd heard. Multiple people talking about me, climbing stairs that went nowhere. The 5th night I thought I was ready. I'd made it through 4 nights of this shit, and I only had 2 more to go. I could handle whatever came next. I was wrong. It started around midnight. I was sitting at the desk trying to focus on updating the weather log when I heard it, humming, soft and sweet, like a child singing a lullaby. The sound was coming from inside the tower. I looked up from my notebook, pen frozen in my hand. The humming continued, a simple melody I almost recognized. Something my mother might have sung when I was little. The voice was high and clear, definitely a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old. But there was no kid in the tower. There was no one in the tower except me. The humming moved. It started near the kitchen area, then drifted toward the windows. I could track its progress around the room, the voice staying at the same level like someone walking in circles. Chen's notebook was right there on the desk. I flipped it open with shaking hands and found the rule I needed. If you hear humming, get under the bed immediately. Stay there until dawn. The humming got louder, closer. I dropped to my knees and scrambled under the narrow bed, squeezing into the dusty space between the mattress and the floor. The wooden planks were rough against my back, and I had to turn my head sideways to fit. From this angle, I could see most of the cabin floor, the kitchen area, the desk, the space near the door. That's when I saw the feet. Small feet in old-fashioned shoes, black leather with little buckles like something from a history book. They walked past my hiding spot, moving with the same rhythm as the humming. Step, 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 and the sweet melody floating down from somewhere above. The feet stopped at the kitchen. I heard drawers opening, the sound of items being moved around. A can rolled across the floor, my soup from dinner. Then something heavier hit the ground with a thud. The humming never stopped. That simple, innocent melody that made my skin crawl. More sounds. Cabinet doors opening and closing. Items being pulled off shelves and dropped. The feet moved around the kitchen area, and I could hear my supplies being scattered across the floor. A jar of peanut butter rolled past my hiding spot, spinning slowly until it bumped against the far wall. The label was facing me, Skippy, extra crunchy. I'd bought it 3 days ago at the grocery store in town, back when my biggest worry was whether I'd brought enough food for the week. The feet kept moving. They went to the desk area next, and I heard papers rustling. My weather log, probably. Or maybe Chen's notebook. The thought of those small hands touching the rules made my stomach clench. Something else hit the floor. Then another item. The kid was going through everything, searching for something or just making a mess. The humming got louder, more cheerful. Like this was all a fun game. The feet stopped right beside the bed. I held my breath. The humming was directly above me now, so close I could feel the vibrations through the mattress. Those old-fashioned shoes were maybe 6 inches from my face, close enough that I could see the scuff marks on the leather. The humming grew louder, louder. The melody echoed in the small space under the bed, surrounding me from all sides. I pressed my hands over my ears again, but it didn't help. The sound seemed to come from inside my head. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to count. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. But the numbers got mixed up with the melody and I lost track. All I could do was lie there and wait, breathing as quietly as possible while that sweet, horrible humming filled the air above me. The feet shifted, turned. For a moment I thought the kid was going to crouch down and look under the bed. I pictured a pale face with dark eyes, smiling while it hummed that endless lullaby. But the feet moved away. They walked toward the door, the humming growing fainter as they went. I heard the door open, the same creak it always made, and then footsteps on the stairs, going down. The humming faded as the footsteps descended. Step by step, the melody got quieter until I couldn't hear it anymore. Just like the voices the night before, it didn't fade gradually. It just stopped, like someone had walked out of range. I stayed under the bed for another hour, counting my breaths and listening for any sound of return. My back ached from the wooden floor, and my legs were going numb, but I didn't move. The rules said to stay until dawn, and I wasn't taking any chances. When the first gray light started showing through the curtains, I finally crawled out. My whole body was stiff, and I had to grab the desk to pull myself upright. The cabin was a disaster. My supplies were scattered everywhere. Cans of soup rolled into corners, the coffee container overturned, my spare clothes pulled out of the dresser and thrown around. The jar of peanut butter sat against the far wall where I'd seen it roll. Everything I'd brought with me had been touched, moved, examined, but there was no sign of how anyone could have gotten in. The door was still locked from the inside, chain in place. All the windows were secure. No broken glass, no forced entry. Just the aftermath of a child's rampage through my belongings. I spent the next hour cleaning up, putting everything back where it belonged. My hands shook as I picked up each item, remembering the sound of it hitting the floor while I hid under the bed. When I was done, I sat at the desk and stared at the radio. It was time to make the call I'd been dreading. Time to sound the alarm and report what had happened. I picked up the microphone and keyed the transmitter. Base station, this is Tower 7. I need to report an incident. I sat at the desk, staring at the radio microphone in my hand. The words were right there. Base station, this is Tower 7. I need to report an incident. But I couldn't make myself say them. What would I tell them? That a kid in old-fashioned shoes had torn through my supplies while humming? That voices had climbed impossible stairs? That my dead wife had called me on a radio that was turned off? I set the microphone back in its cradle and rubbed my face. My hands still shook a little from cleaning up the mess. Every can of soup, every piece of clothing, every item in that cabin had been touched by something that shouldn't exist. But I had 2 more nights left on this shift. 2 more nights, and then I could walk away with my pay and never come back. I'd already made it through 4 nights. The rules worked. Chen's rules had kept me alive this long. I could do 2 more. I spent the morning updating my notes, writing down everything I could remember about the voices and the humming child. The weather log had become something else entirely, a record of impossible things that happened in a place that shouldn't exist. My handwriting looked shaky on the page, but I kept writing. Someone needed to know. If something happened to me, maybe the next person would find these notes and understand. The afternoon was clear and cold. I did my routine weather check, scanning the horizon with binoculars for any sign of smoke. Nothing but endless forest stretching in every direction. The radio crackled with normal dispatch traffic, other towers reporting wind speeds and visibility. Normal people doing normal jobs in normal places. I was adjusting the wind gauge when I saw movement at the tree line. A figure emerged from the forest about a quarter-mile away. Just a person in regular hiking clothes, dark jacket, jeans, boots. Nothing unusual about that. People hike these trails sometimes, though it was rare to see anyone this far out. The figure started walking toward the tower. I watched through the binoculars as they got closer. Medium height, couldn't tell if it was a man or woman from this distance. They moved at a steady pace, not hurrying, just walking across the clearing like they had every right to be there. When they got about 100 yards from the base of the tower, they stopped and looked up at me. Then they started waving. It was a normal wave, hand raised, moving back and forth in that universal greeting gesture. Friendly, casual, the kind of wave you'd give to a neighbor across the street. I felt my own hand start to rise. The urge was strong, almost automatic. Someone waves at you, you wave back. It's basic human courtesy. My hand was halfway up before I caught myself and forced it back down to the binoculars. The figure kept waving. Not frantically, not desperately, just that same steady, friendly wave. Like they had all the time in the world. I should go down and see what they wanted. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they needed help. Maybe they were just being friendly. My hand moved toward the door handle without me deciding to move it. The metal was cold under my palm. All I had to do was turn it, walk down those stairs and say hello. Be a decent human being. Help a fellow hiker. My fingers started to turn the handle. Then I remembered Chen's notebook. Day, rule number 2. Do not acknowledge people who approach the tower. Do not wave. Do not speak to them. Do not go outside. I yanked my hand back from the door like it was on fire. The figure was still waving. I raised the binoculars again and focused on them. They looked perfectly normal. Just a person in hiking gear. But they hadn't moved any closer to the tower. They'd been waving for at least 5 minutes now, and they were standing in exactly the same spot. I watched for another 10 minutes. The figure never stopped waving, never shifted position, never took a step in any direction. Just that same steady wave, over and over, like a mechanical toy that someone had wound up and set in motion. The sun was getting lower. I had maybe an hour before sunset. I forced myself to look away from the figure and focus on my evening routine. Heat up dinner. Check the radio. Draw the curtains. Follow the rules that had kept me alive this long. But every few minutes I found myself glancing toward the window. The figure was still there, still waving. As the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared, I pulled the curtains shut and lit the propane stove. The familiar blue flame was comforting, something real and normal in a place where nothing else made sense. I heated up a can of beef stew and ate it mechanically, not really tasting anything. The radio crackled with evening check-ins from other towers. I gave my report when dispatch called. Clear skies, light wind, no smoke. I didn't mention the figure outside. When full darkness fell, I was sitting at the desk with Chen's notebook open in front of me. Night rule number 6. If you hear humming, get under the bed immediately. I didn't hear humming. Instead, I heard the door rattle. Not knocking this time. The handle turned back and forth, metal scraping against metal, like someone was testing to see if it was locked. The rattling stopped. Then came the knocking. It started soft, just like the first night. 3 gentle taps, then 3 more. Then the rhythm changed, faster, more insistent. The knocks got louder, harder, until the whole door was shaking in its frame. I grabbed my sleeping bag and crawled under the bed. The knocking didn't stop. It went on and on, sometimes soft, sometimes thunderous. It moved around the cabin just like before. Door, side wall, back wall, windows. But this time it felt different. More determined, more angry. Hours passed. My back ached from lying on the hard floor. My legs went numb. But the knocking never stopped. Not for a single minute. It was like whatever was out there had decided to keep trying until dawn, no matter how long it took. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still feel the vibrations through the floor. The whole tower swayed with each heavy blow. I started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. but lost track when the knocking shifted to a rapid-fire pattern that sounded like machine gun fire. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps climbing up toward the cabin. But the knocking was still happening at the door. How could something be knocking and climbing at the same time? The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The knocking stopped. Then it started again, but now it was coming from directly above me. Something was on the roof, pounding down at the cabin from overhead. The sound was deafening, like someone dropping bowling balls on the ceiling over and over again. I curled up in a ball under the bed and waited for dawn. The knocking never stopped, not once. For 6 straight hours, something hammered at that cabin from every possible direction. Door, walls, windows, roof. When the first gray light finally crept through the gaps in the curtains, the sound cut off like someone had flipped a switch. I stayed under the bed for another hour, just to be sure. When I finally crawled out, my whole body was stiff and sore. The cabin looked normal, the door was still locked. The windows were still secure, but I knew something had changed. Whatever was out there wasn't just testing anymore, it was getting ready for something. One more night. I just had to survive one more night. I stayed under that bed until the gray light started creeping through the gaps in the curtains. My back was killing me, and my legs had gone numb hours ago. But I wasn't moving until I was damn sure it was over. The knocking had stopped the second dawn broke, just like every other night. One moment it was this constant hammering that made the whole tower shake. The next, it was dead silent, like someone had flipped a switch. I crawled out from under the bed, my joints popping like bubble wrap. Everything hurt. My sleeping bag was soaked with sweat, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I walked to the window on stiff legs and peered through the curtains. The clearing was empty. No figure in hiking clothes, no one waving. Just morning mist rising off the trees and my truck sitting where I'd left it 6 days ago. 6 days. Christ, it felt like 6 months. I stood there for a long time, watching the forest, waiting for something to move. But there was nothing. Just pine trees and that awful quiet that comes after a storm. My duffel bag was still on the bed where I'd dropped it that first day. Seemed like a lifetime ago. I started shoving clothes into it, not bothering to fold anything. My hands were still shaking, making it hard to zip the damn thing closed. Chen's notebook was sitting on the desk, open to some random page. I picked it up and flipped to the back, found a blank page, and wrote in block letters, "Do not wave back." Then I underlined it 3 times. Someone else would come up here eventually. Some other poor bastard who needed the money and didn't ask enough questions. Maybe they'd be smart enough to read the whole notebook before their first sunset. I grabbed my laptop, unplugged the radio equipment, and took one last look around the cabin. 12 by 12 feet of hell. The coffee mug was back on the counter where it belonged. The weather log was still sitting next to the radio. Everything looked normal, like nothing had happened. But I knew better now. I left the notebook open to my new rule and headed for the door. The metal handle was cold under my palm, same as it had been every time I'd touched it this week. But this time I was turning it to leave, not to lock myself in. The stairs creaked under my boots, 47 steps down, just like always. I counted them without meaning to. At the bottom, I threw my duffel bag in the truck bed and climbed behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the second try. I'd been half expecting it not to start, like whatever was out here might try to keep me. But the old Ford rumbled to life, and I put it in drive without looking back at the tower. The forestry roads were just as rough as they'd been coming in, potholes and washouts that made my teeth rattle. But every mile I put between me and Tower 7 felt like breathing again. It took 3 hours to reach the main office in Prince George. The building was one of those government jobs from the 70s. Brown brick and narrow windows that made it look like a bunker. I'd been here exactly once before, when I'd signed the paperwork for this job. Robert Jarvis was behind the same desk, wearing the same pressed khaki shirt. He looked up when I walked in, and I could see him taking in my appearance. I probably looked like hell. 6 days of stubble, clothes that smelled like fear sweat, eyes that hadn't seen real sleep in a week. "Daniel, you're not due back until tomorrow." "I'm done." I dropped my keys on his desk. I quit. He picked up the keys, turned them over in his palm. "Everything all right up there? Equipment problems?" "No problems. I just can't do it anymore." Jarvis studied my face for a long moment. He had that look people get when they're trying to decide if they should ask more questions. Smart man, he decided not to. "All right, I'll need you to fill out some paperwork. Exit interview, equipment return form, that sort of thing." The forms were standard government bullshit. Reason for leaving, personal. "Would you recommend this position to others?" I left that one blank. "Any suggestions for improvement?" "Read the notebook." Jarvis processed everything without comment. He was efficient, I'll give him that. Had me signed out and officially unemployed in under an hour. "Your final paycheck will be direct deposited within 2 weeks," he said, sliding a copy of the paperwork across the desk. "And Daniel, thanks for the work you did up there. I know it's not easy." I looked at him, wondering if he knew. If any of them knew what really went on at Tower 7. But his face gave nothing away. "Yeah," I said, "it's not." I was back on the highway by noon, heading south toward the border. My truck had never felt so good. Solid metal and glass, AM radio playing classic rock, civilization rushing past at 70 miles an hour. I stopped for gas in Kamloops and called my landlord from the payphone outside the station. Told him I'd have rent money in 2 weeks. He wasn't happy about the delay, but he didn't threaten to evict me either. Small victories. By evening, I was back in Seattle, sitting in my apartment with the lights on and the TV playing some mindless sitcom. Normal sounds, normal light, normal everything. I made a sandwich and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the street. Cars going by. People walking their dogs. A couple arguing outside the convenience store. Beautiful, ordinary human chaos. It wasn't until I was brushing my teeth that I really understood what had happened up there. Chen hadn't been paranoid. He'd been careful. Those rules weren't the ramblings of someone who'd spent too much time alone in the woods. They were survival instructions. And that job posting, the one that had been so vague about duties, that had mentioned other responsibilities without explaining what they were, that hadn't been poor writing, that had been intentional. They couldn't put monitor forest fires and don't get killed by whatever the hell lives out there in the classified ads. I spit into the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. Same face, but different eyes. The kind of eyes you get when you've seen something that doesn't fit in the normal world. I never went back to the woods. Not for work, not for camping, not for anything. Found a job at a hardware store in Ballard. Indoor work, fluorescent lights. Customers who complained about normal things like paint colors and screw sizes. Sometimes I'd see forestry service trucks around town, and I'd wonder who was up at Tower 7 now. If they'd found the notebook. If they'd been smart enough to follow the rules. I hoped so. Because whatever was out there in those trees, it was still waiting, still testing, still learning. And it was very, very patient.